Well, initially, I would like to ask you, just tell me a little bit about your book and what inspired you mainly to write your story.
Sure. I mean, the interesting part is that I still have trouble calling myself a writer. I didn't go to school for writing. I never had any intention of writing a book per se. As you mentioned, I actually worked years ago in the corporate world. I was a manager with a call center, and I'd done that for about 7 years. I had employees that I would hire and fire. It was the real corporate deal, and it came to a point where just was not happy with that. So I ended up leaving that job, and then I went on to work with kids at a before and after school and elementary school program, which I loved. I took a huge cut in pay, but it didn't matter because my inner happiness was there. And so I did that for 5 years, and it was just a wonderful, amazing, life-changing experience. I've struggled with addiction throughout my life for the greater part of my life, and at the roughly the end of those 5 years, I ended up suffering a terrible relapse, one that literally all but took me to death. And so I had actually, it kind of started, I guess you could say, in July of 2011. And it was a Monday, and I went into work. I was doing a summer program. School was out, but I worked with the kids at a summer program. And I went in, and it was a particularly hungover morning for me. And usually I can deal with it, but this was just one of those really, really bad ones. So I told them I had a flu, and they got someone else to come in, and I left work late morning. My last memory of that day is basically getting home, maybe noontime, somewhere around there, and that's it until later on in the afternoon. I woke up in a jail cell. As soon as I got home, I started drinking to nurse the hangover and to calm my shakes down and the withdrawal symptoms. And so subsequently, I ended up driving, completely blackout driving, which is hard for me to talk about, because it's obviously a very, very selfish thing to do. And um, it's something that I work through, and I'm still trying to heal from that. But luckily, I did not hurt anyone. I did not harm myself. I just woke up in this jail cell. I was, pulled over for the DUI, 45 minutes away from where I lived on the highway. So I was gone. What happened though is they kept me in the county lockup overnight, and they let me go the next morning on a promise to appear, which means you'll come to the court date at a certain time. And that was kind of that rock bottom, I guess they call it in the fellowships. That was what really started to crack my heart center wide open. It wasn't a love thing at first. It was a real desperation kind of thing. I had to call my parents to come pick me up, and they agreed to do that only under the grounds that I would go to detox for the next 5 to 7 days. And I said that's fine. I was just so out of my mind and tired and beat down that I said okay. I had been to detox a few times before. I knew what I was into. So I did that for 5 days. While there, I found out I lost my job. I missed my brother's wedding where I was supposed to be his best man. It was just a very dark, heavy time. From detox, I went into treatment in New Jersey. I live in Connecticut. They wanted to send me out of state to an inpatient program, and I had nothing, so I agreed. And I went to treatment. I was there for 2 months, and it was a really tough time for me in the beginning. I was still feeling very sick, very dark, very just desperate and hopeless. And I was a few weeks into treatment where the clinical director saw a medicine Buddha tattoo that I have on my leg, and he had an interest in Buddhism. So we started chatting. He called me into his office, and he knew I was not in a good way while I was there. And so he told me about this author. His name's Jarvis J. Masters, and he asked me if I'd heard of him, and I actually had. I didn't know his work, but I heard of him because the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron talks about him often. And Jarvis is an inmate on death row in San Quentin's prison, and while there, he was sentenced originally to about 8 years for a crime he did commit. But while there, he was accused of sharpening a spear that was used in the murder of one of the prison guards. So from that 8 years, he subsequently has now been there, I think like 32 years, 33 years, and wrongly imprisoned. Actually, so much so that the evidence is so overwhelming in favor of his innocence that in 2011, the California court system, for the first time ever, has opened up reopened a case of a death row inmate. So we're hoping very much for his release. And I share that because he wrote a book called Finding Freedom that the clinical director brought in. I read that book, and that was the spark I needed. In the book, Jarvis talks about in death row, one of the darkest, most desolate places you can imagine. He started learning about Buddhism, and he took his bodhisattva vows and, vowed to practice nonviolence on death row, and it was just like, wow. And he tells, he goes on in the story. I just recommend it to everyone. It's a story filled with hope and redemption and just utter beauty and darkness too. But the underlying message is hope. And that's what really became the catalyst for me to get off my own pity pot and to remember, to rekindle that spark of hope that was in me that I thought was gone. And that's kind of the long short of it. So that's how, I returned home with literally nothing, no job, no money, no prospects. I had to move back in with my parents, file unemployment. I've been pretty self-sufficient since I was 16. I've had a job, lived on my own for most of my life. So it was a real humbling experience. And one day while I was out running, it wasn't even a thought. It was like one of those inner voices that said, you need to write a book. And it was a very strange thing to me, but it was an undeniable knowing. It wasn't like the Neil Donald Walsh voices of God where I heard a voice outside of me. It was just one of those internal, you need to write a book. And so from there, all the stars kind of aligned. The one intention I should make since I moved home from treatment is each morning before I meditate, I ask the higher power of my understanding to help me get out of my own way so that I can be of service to anyone in any capacity, and in that service, that it comes from a guidance greater than myself. And I mention that because I attribute that one intention or prayer I said every morning to the reason this book is now published, to the reason you and I are sitting here talking, to the reason that I'm still alive and able to be of service. So sorry if that was a little long-winded, but that's a pretty abridged version of how the book came to be.
It's of course relatively new, right? It was being published this month.
Yeah, it's only about 3.5 weeks it's been out, and it's already into its second printing, which I just found out last week that my publisher's back ordered on it, and it's just a pretty incredible thing to see the way that the most important thing is that I'm getting these nice emails and messages from people all over the world that are reading it, whether they have an addiction issue or not. The book's not just about addiction recovery. It talks, as you read, quite a bit about spirituality and the independent arts. But I get a lot of people that it really touches them. Like I said, I have trouble calling myself a writer. So what I do to try to make up for that is just write as raw and as candidly and from the heart as I can.
Yeah.
And I think that's where readers connect with it. So yeah, in just under a month, it's been amazing. Really, very touching and humbling.
That's so cool. And even before the print, you wrote the book. And in what way did it change you? Could you feel change?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, it was a very healing process. It was also a very tough process, because as I'm writing it, I'm sifting through a lot of the wreckage of my past. And like I just said, I want to be raw and candid and very vulnerable in my writing and really give my all to the reader and not try to sugarcoat anything. So it was healing in the sense of, it's kind of a cathartic purging sense, as you're getting it out there. It's also healing in the sense of, like I said, having these people write to me. The most beautiful compliment I've received on this book that I've heard time and again is that people feel like they're talking to me as they're reading it. It's like a conversation. So that's really touching for me. But yeah, as I'm going through it, I mean, there's ups and downs. There's the good times, the bad times. It hasn't been well. Actually, most of the reviews have been positive, which is nice. I write for websites as well as the book. So, sometimes I'll write an article and it won't resonate for someone, and people can be mean online. They can be rather vicious. And I'm a sensitive guy by nature, so I'll read some things and it certainly hurts. But I'd say 95% of the time it's all people that it resonates for. And that's what I try to focus on, that I'm being of service and trying to help others that are going through difficult times, whether, like I was saying, addiction, family members. I get a lot of messages from parents, even if they have children and they don't know what to do, and so it's just really touching to be in that. And yes, so I've definitely been, and I continue on a daily basis to feel change, and it's a fluid thing rather than concrete. I try to live my life fluidly and allow things to just arise as they will be.
So if you go a few steps back, in your life, can you pinpoint, what really led you into this dark place? Is it a series of events, or was it your personality? What was it?
Yeah, so this is the interesting thing is that growing up, I had a what you would consider a relatively normal life. I still have amazing parents. They're still together, which is rare these days. Most people I know their parents are divorced. Mine aren't, and they're amazing. They're happy individuals. And I have a younger brother who's always been extremely supportive. And as any family, we of course have our ups and downs, but it was a relatively normal life. I did addiction counseling for a few years, and the stories, you see surrounding addiction of rapes and molestations and abuse and just, having addicted parents. I didn't fall into any of those categories. So it's been a very interesting thing for me. And I can say that to this point, I still haven't exactly pinpointed the how and why of where it started from. My father was adopted, so we don't know much about his side of the family. Because they say addiction and whatnot, it can be genetic, though there's still a lot of research being done around that. On my mom's side, there was, some history, but not major. So I don't know if it was genetic or a learned behavior. But yeah, in high school is when I remember I grew up playing soccer and hockey when I was younger, so I was athletic. And in high school, I started playing music. I left sports too. I started falling in love with alternative music and underground punk hardcore music. And I'm not blaming music for it by any means, but I started, kind of really exploring that side of life and playing instruments. And it was in high school that I started to just notice that I didn't have a sense of self-love and self-worth. It was very lacking, and it only got worse as my years went on. And so I started drinking later than most people I did and experimenting with drugs. I was in 11th grade, whereas a lot of people I knew were 8th, ninth, 10th grade were already doing it. So I was a bit of a late bloomer, but I caught up very quickly. And I found that those escapes were wonderful to mask whatever low-level sense of depression I was feeling. The beautiful thing is today, I I don't have that. I don't take any medication, and I'm not anti-medication. I think it serves a wonderful purpose for those that need to be on it. And I was on it for a while too, especially after I came out of this relapse. I needed to take an antidepressant, and I took it for a year, and then I slowly tapered off under a doctor. And from there, now I attribute not taking literally any medication minus a multivitamin to my daily. I try to run 5 or 6 days a week. I also meditate every day. And I believe those two things, as well as the internal work, in my case, maybe step writing in the fellowship or whatever other spiritual practices, whether it's mantra or mala work, whatever. But those things have brought me to this place where today it still creeps in, the self doubt issues, things like that. But I recognize it more as just thoughts and voices, and I'm able to spend more time anchored in that awareness of the thought rather than feeding into the thought. Certainly there are days I feed into it and it sucks, but more times than not today, I feel very grateful that I can simply smile at it and recognize it for what it is, which is just thoughts and not feed into it.
Well, at least you know you're a human and you're not a robot. So,
Oh, absolutely, for sure, and I don't deny it. It would be silly to suppress that stuff. Like it's there, and the suppression, which a lot of people do, is what keeps a lot of us sick and unhealthy and in that state of dis-ease. We try to pretend like things don't bother us when they do, and especially a lot of spiritual practitioners try to play spiritual superhero, where it's like I'm spiritual, so things are always supposed to be great. It's not like that, and
yeah,
it's a nice reminder for people to hear that. I think so.
yeah. And you,
We're
you,
human.
yeah. And you briefly touched the music and the darker music. Do,
Yeah.
do you think could that have an impact on you? Like on the way you were thinking, or maybe the lack of self love?
No, I think the polar opposite. I have a very deep love and respect for the punk hardcore music that I was introduced to at an early age, and I still love it to this day. I listen to it all the time. I'll listen to kirtan and I'll listen to punk. I'm just eclectic like that. But what I really appreciate from that was at that early age of 14 or 15, it was my first, it's kind of cliche to say it like this, but it was my unplugging from the matrix. Like I was being introduced to the raw passion of these bands that were singing about actual things. They weren't pop music just singing about love and whatever, the record labels were writing for them to sing about. They were singing about environmental issues and religion and spirituality and, ethics and all sorts of things. So that was a huge awakening experience for me. And I found that that carried over years later when I started to explore spirituality, that I had this kind of question everything ethics instilled in me. So it allowed me to take a very sincere look at the various spiritual paths I was reading about and the sanghas or churches or synagogues I was visiting. Um, and the cool thing was, if it didn't resonate with me, it didn't resonate. But I honored that it works for other people. You know, I was able to really honor that, wow, this is doing a real service for some people, and that's amazing. You know, God bless. It didn't resonate for me, so I was able to just walk away and look into something else. So I really honored punk and hardcore for that. I think that was what really set those roots for me. So yeah, I know a lot of people do have issues with there's like music that satanic or whatever, and people have always kind of pointed blame at that. But as I write in the book, actually, I've been to a Slayer concert, and they're synonymous, with like darkness, and I love them, and I love them in an entertainment aspect, and I can go to their concert, and I can actually enjoy it and look around at all the people having their great time, and be aware of the oneness of all of us and our interconnectedness and the love that really is underlying that whole thing, because that's where my awareness is at that point. So that's my experience. I'm not saying for anyone else, but even our friend Don Jose Ruiz, who's Don Miguel's brother, he has a love for metal. I see he loves like Iron Maiden and Metallica, and I think that's great. Like, if it resonates for you, awesome. If it doesn't, that's awesome too. To each their own, whatever works for you.
Well, I think, and that's what I've come to learn, over already so many years, if you can respect each other's choices and you can
Right.
respect each other's lifestyle, and
Yes.
because you can, from your point, in the beginning of the book, I noticed that you use some kind of labeling, what was kind of average, people living in a kind of a traditional lifestyle and so. But it's so easy, that I could label you or you could label me, and but often, it's so interesting. What I find so fascinating is that I grew up in a Dutch culture. I'm at the other side of the world. You grew up here in North America,
Right.
and yet, we find each other on this Skype thing, and then you can exchange, and then we figure out that we're just one. It's all
Yes.
those layers of conditioning that we believe, is who we are, of
Yes.
course. And then we figure out that if you can see the beauty of each other, just who we are, as raw as we can be, that's beautiful. And whether it's through dark music or not, it doesn't matter.
No, it's like Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah,
Like I love that line. Here we are, like you said, and we've come together and it's beautiful. My culture was different growing up, yours was different, but yes,
yeah,
we unite now in this underlying experience of oneness. How amazing is
yeah,
that? Really,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah,
It is.
yeah,
Well, you have, when reading your book, you've been quite close to death. I think several times in
yes.
your life, and what have those moments taught you, and what does actually death mean to you right now?
Boy, I was actually thinking quite a bit about death. And last night, in particularly, I was rereading Jack Cornfield's book, A Path. Is it A Path with Heart? A Path of Heart? Um, I apologize. It's over on my bed. I can't really see it, but it's a wonderful book. And I've been feeling like, I'm okay with the idea of death. I recognize it's just, it's symbolic more than anything, birth and death. In the Zen koan, what's your original face? What was your face before you were born? What were your grandparents' face before they were born? I certainly, in my experience, believe that death is not the end of anything. It's the I am awareness that underlies everything that's what's really happening. That's my experience, at least. But so I was mentioning Jack Cornfield because I've been feeling pretty good about it. And I'm reading, he told this quick story in his book about a wealthy man, BMW driver, and this is a story probably back from the 80s, so a while ago, but he had the world, all the material things, and he actually blacked out while he was driving, and he woke up in a hospital. The doctors had found a tumor inside of his head, and they told him essentially, you have two options. Either one, we operate, and we take the chance of possibly you will lose your speech, your sight, and your hearing, but you'll still be alive. Or, and that won't necessarily happen, but it's a possibility. Or we don't operate and you have 6 months to live. We can give you until tomorrow morning to make the decision, but we really need to know by then. So he contacts Jack Cornfield, and Jack goes and visits him in the hospital. And Jack talks about how in that time, that kind of close to death situation, all the man wanted to do was talk about Alan Watts. He had read about some Zen and Buddhism, and he wanted to discuss these things. And he had talked to Jack about how magnificent seeing a pigeon on his windowsill was, and the cup of water he had. All these things that we take for granted on a daily basis. So I was thinking about that last night. I'm like, wow, I do have a fear around death. Like I recognize I have attachments. I love my wife. I love my stepdaughter. I love simply looking out at a sunset. I adore it. I know that I believe at least that yes, after I pass on, that I will, unless I recognize my enlightenment or self-actualization in this lifetime, slim chance, but you never know. But I believe I will, take a rebirth, and so that will hopefully be there for me again in the next time around. But so yeah, man. On the one side, I recognize death is really symbolic, and it's really nothing more than a transition. On the other side, I recognize I still have some fear around it, some real fear around it. So. But it's a good practice to work with.
In your book, you're writing about your first truly comprehensive awakening experience. And when reading, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle,
Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit more. What happened to you? What was so profound?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I kind of laugh when I tell this story because it's kind of lame in comparison to you hear some great awakening stories, people in the Himalayas, and just amazing experiences. For me, it really was as simple as reading this book. And I was in school actually at the time, and during going to school for addiction counseling, so it was during the internships I'd mentioned before, and I really hit it off with my professor. She was a wonderful woman, and this was before I had really any interest in spirituality whatsoever. If anything, I always thought it was kind of a crutch. Though I had spirituality just confused with religion. To me, they were the same thing at the time. I didn't understand the difference because I didn't care to understand the difference. I literally just had no interest. So it was nothing significant. I was actually going through a kind of a breakup. Well, it was a breakup at the time with my then girlfriend. And my professor, we had these weekly or biweekly sessions. She was also my advisor at school, and so she could see that I was, not feeling great, and I kind of told her about it, and she's like, do you read much? And at the time, I really wasn't a reader. How things have changed since then, because all I do now is read. But so she told me about this book called The Power of Now, and I was like, all right, I'll read it. I didn't really care to read it, but I really trusted her. I had this trust in her, and I really honored who she was as a teacher and a human being. So the next class was a couple days later. She brought it in and loaned it to me, and I took it home that night. And I'll never forget I had this really uncomfortable couch in my loft apartment in Middletown, Connecticut. And it was by the time I finished with the introduction, before I even got into the book, I just knew. It was like one of those heart center explosion moments, like I just was overwhelmed with warmth. The simple thing that he said in the beginning, and I don't remember verbatim, though I should, because I've read that book over a dozen times now easily, but the simple idea that I am more than the thoughts that are happening in my head. That was the second kind of unplugging in my life. The first was the punk hardcore, but when I heard that, and that for anyone in spiritual circles, that's kind of like common knowledge these days, but for someone who had no idea about spirituality, to actually have that, it was literally like having the rug pulled out from under me. And I went on to read that book 3 times, front to back, in succession. I was, oh my gosh, wow, this is amazing. And learning about ego nature and the pain body and, all of this stuff. And it really, that was what it was for me, that started to connect the heart and the mind, make that, that long trip, but they started to come together. And, man, and so I started meditating and really getting on with my spiritual exploration. I made the library a few blocks over my second home, and from Eckhart Tolle, I went on to Ram Dass and Ken Wilber and Wayne Dyer and Pema Chodron, Thich Nhat Hanh, and just all these amazing people. And then I ended up seeing the What the Bleep Do We Know documentary. My teacher showed it to us in class later on that year, and subsequently I've become wonderful friends with the co-creator, Betsy Chassey, who she just released a great book called Tipping Sacred Cows through my same publisher, and I know she's friends with Don Miguel as well, and it's just, yeah, so the crazy thing, the full circle thing, is that I went from having no interest in spirituality to then immersing myself in it, to now here I am literally working with people like Ken Wilber and Betsy and Ram Dass, and they're writing endorsements for my book, and I'm interviewing them and they're interviewing me, and it's just, talk about how amazing life can be. It's really on a heart level. I'm so touched. I'm so touched by these things. So yeah,
That's so wonderful, and one of the reasons I ask you this question, because what I felt with you is that you needed this trust in this person,
yeah,
this teacher, and that's actually, you accepted what she said and what she offered, and you took the book and you read it, and
yeah.
I firmly believe that the book you've been writing, it will change a lot of other people's lives. And yesterday I talked to a friend of mine, and she has a husband, who has addiction issues, and I'm sure, when he reads it or he's willing to read it, that it will change his life. So I think it's beautiful, that way.
Well, thanks. That's my whole humble intention with this book. I didn't write it to hit the New York Times bestseller list to become some spiritual rock star. I mean, if it sells a lot of copies, great. And the reason I'm happy about that is because I hope it's helping people. But really, I really wrote this book, for, in a way, my 24-year-old self, the me that was first coming out of detox and stumbling onto the spiritual path when I was reading, Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass and those people. I wanted to write something that's accessible for this generation or the younger generation of truth seekers, that they can pick up, and it's a very, easy read. It's a very down to earth, I think, honest offering. So thank you for saying that. And that really is my only intention, is that it be of service and really help others. So thanks.
So where do you believe lies the difference between choosing the light and love, or remaining in this completely, well, let's use your terminology, fucked up state, where where lies the difference in making this choice?
Interesting question. I mean, the grander scope, the first thing that comes to mind is it's kind of both ends. It's the dual housed within the non-dual. It's already, it's two sides of the same coin to me. It's completely interconnected. But you're right. It's, what are we going to choose? Which way are we going to go with it? And some days we might actually choose one way, and the other days we might choose another. For me, I like to think that I choose that path towards love and light today, while honoring the dark, fucked up times, because they are certainly part of my story and part of almost all of our stories. Like I said, we're human. We go through this stuff. But the question I had to ask myself is, like, when is enough enough? I feel like I should have died for all intents and purposes many times over, but I haven't. So, okay, I'm still here today. What am I going to do with this life now? Like, I have been through some of the darkest of dark times, that people could ever imagine, and I'm still here. I've still made it. So, really, am I going to keep going down that path? Or am I going to honor that something greater than myself has kept me here, and that I can be of service and help others? But what I had to do before doing that was really do the work on me, and start going inside and cleaning house in there. Something I still do to this day and will do till the day I die. But, after I spent some time doing that, then I was ready to start offering others my heart unconditionally, and uh, without any facade attached. Here I am, and here's what I have learned and experienced, and hopefully you can take something away from this as well. So it's up to us, and it's not always easy. It's never easy actually, but it's our choice, and what do we want to do?
At some point in your book, you're writing a beautiful chapter about about your fuck ups, and you say, I quote, there's still very much a part of me that is rooted in the darkness of my past, and
Yeah.
all this shit that's buried from years of selfish, self-destructive behavior. I think that there are many people who are in a similar situation, as you have been, who would love to hear, how you deal with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what I do recognize, there's a couple of great books that Dr. Joe Dispenza wrote, who was featured in What the Bleep Do We Know, and he's a Hay House, wonderful Hay House author. Um, his most recent book, which I found to be the most helpful, is, I believe, called Breaking the Habit of Being You, or something to that effect. Yeah. Yes. I loved that book, and his first book was great too. I know it's a little harder for people to read because it's a little heavier on the science, and but so what I recognize, the long short of it, that is that there is like a neurochemistry happening in me that's beyond my conscious, well, maybe not beyond my conscious control, but it's rooted in me through my experience. It's kind of rooted in my cells and the DNA. And so I recognize that those times in my life, the really dark times, I was in such a numb, dark place that those times where I was using it, I was coming close to death and just having these insane situations in life, those were the times where, the only times really where I was feeling alive, feeling the sense of life coursing through my veins. So that's rooted in me. That's there. A lot of it's still subconscious, I'm sure, and a lot of it I've brought to the conscious through doing various healing work. But so as these things arise, like as I write in there are still times where I will have thoughts that actually are attracted to, like even on an energetic level, I feel attracted to when I was withdrawing over a toilet bowl vomiting. Like, I know that sounds completely insane, but as I said, I'm a very honest person. So there's a part of me that is attracted to that insanity, that using part of my life. Again, because that, I think for me, that's when I was feeling alive. How I deal with it today is I just recognize it as insane thoughts. It is as simple as that. I have these insane thoughts that still rear their ugly head. I have these insane kind of energetic feelings. They happen significantly less today than they did, and I'm sure as time continues to go on and I get farther away from that last relapse, it'll get more and more less frequent. But it's just like I still have what are called relapse dreams. Those are few and far between these days, but once in a while I will have a dream where I go out and get drunk, and not just drunk, but I will get into my old sneaky behaviors that come along with addiction, the hiding of the drinking and the lying to people about it. And I wake up, and I will literally wake up with my stomach churning, feeling like I'm going through withdrawals, like I had actually drank last night. So I'm grateful for those times, though, because they're a wonderful reminder to me of just how terrible it was. So I just recognize these thoughts and these feelings as nothing more than those thoughts and feelings, and that I don't have to feed into them. And I look at where I'm at today, and it's a pretty beautiful place. And I'm not speaking material like money-wise. I'm talking about internally. It is a beautiful place that I can wake up most mornings with a smile on my face, and I go to bed most nights with a smile on my face. Life is not all rainbows and unicorns by any means, but it's much more of a beautiful experience today, and one that I really honor and am grateful for than I ever have been. So just kind of keep that in, I keep myself in check by remembering that.
Actually, I have a last question for you, but I noticed that you can move quite swiftly, from one dark episode or chapter in your book to an immense state of gratitude, like in your chapter about love and the universal curriculum.
Yeah.
Where does gratitude in general, come from for you?
For me, I really attribute my overwhelming sense of gratitude today to the fact that I'm still alive. Really, it's not lost on me those dark times where I was in the detoxes, where I was in the emergency rooms, where I was in those psych hospitals. Like, those are still very much a part of my makeup, of who I am. So remembering that, how could I not be grateful today to actually wake up and not have to be literally a slave to addiction? I was doing an interview recently where we were talking about that, and I was saying how there were so many times in my life where I would have a bottle of alcohol in my hand and I would be crying because I did not want to drink it, but it was completely out of my control at that point. I was just lost in the grips. No matter how much I didn't want to, unless I got myself into detox or treatment, there was no way I was stopping. So to remember those times where I was like a slave, I was a slave to something, and today I'm not. Today I have a freedom from addiction. I have a freedom from, for the most part, a lot of that darkness of my life. And more than anything, the fact that I am able to be here and be of service. I know I keep coming back to that. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but that is what it is absolutely all about for me. Ram Dass's guru Maharaji gave him the teaching of love, serve, remember. Love everyone, serve everyone, remember God, and whatever God means to you in that context. But those are three words that I hold very dear to my heart every single day. I try to love as many people as I can. It's not always easy, but do the best you can. I try to be of service, and not just in the recovery addiction field, be of service in any way I can to anyone I can. And remembering God, the higher power of my understanding that has made all of this possible and continues. It's grace for me. It's nothing short of grace. And I know I'm not doing it. I'm doing the best to get out of my own way to allow that grace to work through me. I mean, I do the legwork, but that's the extent of what I do. I believe that, at least. So, yeah.
Thanks so
Well,
much. I
I
really
I
appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No matter where it ends up, thank you for your time. It was a wonderful opportunity to connect with you, Dirk.
Likewise. Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Chris.
All right,
Blessings
take
to
good
you.
care.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.